Chromacopia.
How's it going, y'all? It's your boy Raymond back up in here with another album review, and today we're going to be talking about a special one. I'm finally going to be talking about Chromakopia, the new album by Tyler, the Creator. This is the 7th studio album from Tyler, the Creator, and it is the 4th in the so-called, I guess, post-Flower Boy era of Tyler. And now for me, I've been a huge Tyler fan for a while now. Ever since I was 16 when I heard Flower Boy and Wolf for the first time. Those were really sort of like my stable albums when I was a teenager. And that really sort of pushed me into a wider spectrum of music that I was listening to at the time. It really sort of just stuck with me for a while. And he's one of the few artists that has carried through like into over like the past like 8 years since then. That I can still really appreciate and that I really love. And flash forward to now, you know, I've seen Tyler live. I saw him on the Call Me If You Get Lost tour along with Vince Staples and Kelly Uchis, which was just huge for me. That was like 19-year-old Ray's like biggest dream was to see him live along with Vince and Callie. It was like a 3-in-1 concert for me. So that was a great experience. And I was really excited to see what he was going to put out after Call Me If You Get Lost. And so obviously, you know, we got the estate sale, which I thought had some interesting tracks on it. But then after that, I assumed, okay, well, you know, he added some songs for the deluxe version, aka the estate sale. So I assumed that he was going to be taking like a bit of a break and maybe we would get another album in like another 2 to 3 years or so. But, you know, the future was a little uncertain after that. And it seemed like, you know, maybe he even would have wanted to like hang it up and maybe call it quits after that. But who knew? Just a few years later, we got Chromakopia. And, you know, like with every new Tyler album, the beats are insane and the lyrics are insanely in depth and also will, you know, make you sad, but at the same time are very introspective, and that's no different with Chromakopia either. But from the get-go, this thing is a lot more industrial, I would say, than his previous albums, almost harkening back to like Cherry Bomb era for a bit of it. There's just a lot of like instrumentation that feels really heavy, and the instrumentation also feels a lot more like metallic on this album. And also the aesthetic with like the promo videos, the sea container, the masking, like the sepia black and white looking imagery with like the color correction over it. I mean, look at this thing. Like it's pretty obvious like what he's going for here. This is the box set that like the t-shirt and the CD came in along with like a poster. And, you know, it's pretty clear from like the imagery from the start that, you know, this was going to be a different experience. So you start obviously with Saint Chroma, which is this huge thumping opener, almost in similar vein to Igor's theme. You get like these beautiful backing vocals from like Daniel Caesar, and then this like huge instrumental that comes in at like the halfway point, big flowing chorus. And it's very introductory and it's very beautiful and really sets up the album really well and gives us like a little hint as to the story that's going to carry through the album. Next, after that, we get Ra-Ta-Ta, which is essentially just like a straight up banger, almost you could say from like the leftovers from Call Me If You Get Lost, but with a little bit of an edgier twist to them. And this one is definitely just a big speaker knocker. Tyler is back on his like braggadocious stuff and just really sort of laying into this track and playing into like the different little like voices and cadences that he's putting on. That's like sprinkled throughout this whole album, but you really get like the first taste of it on this song. And the lyrics also hint at Tyler sort of becoming a little bit more like isolated as he's reached a lot of highs in his career as of recent, and sort of, you know, transitions well into Noid, which is the next track. You know, obviously Noid was the single coming earlier of like only like I think a few weeks before the album's actual release, but you know, I kind of wanted to save the whole album listening experience as like a whole, so I didn't listen to it at first, just because I know how Tyler is, and I know especially on his past few projects, you know, with going into more conceptual territory with a lot of his newer releases, I wanted to listen to the whole album as like a complete project, and so I tried to almost like avoid the single, but hearing it in the context of the album, I'm glad I did that, mainly because the transitions all over this thing are just so interesting and really sort of have like a through line through all of the songs on the album. And so on Noid, he essentially carries over that theme that was hinted at in Ratata, where he just wants people to leave him alone. He's paranoid that people are like constantly scoping him out in his private life, and he wants to separate himself sort of from the public eye. And it's a theme that also gets expanded as we continue out through the album. And then after this, we get to Darling I, and it's sort of from this point on where we really start to see Tyler sort of exposing a lot of the stuff that has been going on in his private life, after previously sort of explaining that he doesn't want people prying. You just have to essentially experience how he lives his life through the music. And so in Darling I, it's almost like an apology song to a lover, I guess you could say, in a sense, in the disguise of like a 90s R&B track. The song is like super dancey, super soulful. You got like some great backing vocals and a great outro by Tizo Touchdown. Tyler with like a verse essentially explaining that, you know, if this doesn't work out, if love doesn't work out for me, I'll be much happier just literally making music and winning Grammys than having a relationship and kids, basically. Which, I mean, is honestly kind of like a sad bar, but at the same time, you know, with Tyler where he's at right now, it makes a lot of sense, and he continues to expand this as we go further into the track list. And so with the next track, Hey Jane, this is probably one of the most like well-written Tyler tracks I think I've ever heard. It has two verses that essentially depict this situation where Tyler and this woman, who is going to be named Jane in this case, are essentially going through a situation where she is pregnant and they're debating on whether or not they should keep the kid. It essentially allows Tyler to explain where he's at, not only in his personal life, but also just in his career, because even though he's hit these high of highs in his career as of right now and is only going further, he still feels like he's not ready to be a dad yet, even though he just hit his 30s. He's got gray hairs, as he references a lot throughout the album. His age is like a big thing throughout the entire project. But in this track specifically, he still feels that he's not ready, but doesn't want to give any sort of pressure to her to keep it or to have an abortion. With her verse, you know, it seems like the conversation was like actually had because of how detailed it is, but also how matter of fact the situation seems to be, at least the way that Tyler is portraying it. It's interesting the way that he portrays like her side of the story. She seems like almost more calm about the situation than he is. Tyler's sort of like running around in his mind thinking that, you know, he's done like some grave mistake and he's messed up and he feels awful for it. And she's almost like the one calming him down, saying like, no, don't worry about it. Like, no pressure. You're a great dude. You're kind of weird, but you're a great dude and we'll figure it out, kind of thing. I think it's one of the more genuine tracks that Tyler's ever written, and I think also one of the most well-written tracks that Tyler's ever made. The instrumental is also really pretty and really nice and sort of allows, while also being beautiful on its own, sort of allows the storytelling to really shine through. There's not a whole lot going on in terms of like the beat structure. It's just a lot of synths, a lot of pianos, really nice melodies to back up sort of the storytelling aspect of the entire track. From here, we take sort of like the first interesting detour on the album with I Killed You. This song essentially is sort of Tyler diving into like his identity, not only as like an African American, but just him as he's aging again. Tyler, of course, has just reached his 30s, and it's essentially just like a track depicting how he feels with his identity being shaven off and everything like that. A lot of hair depictions and references, the idea of like killing that part, like shaving his head, getting rid of his hair, aka his identity in a sense. The instrumental, I think, is rather interesting because it almost feels like something is going on where it feels like a little bit eerie and suspicious, like a lot of the other tracks on this album too. There's like this really heavy bass that comes in like sporadically, like whenever he says like I killed you. There's a lot more of these like metallic sounds that are bouncing around in the instrumental that I think really sell sort of like the paranoia and the eeriness of the track, along with these blaring horn sections that are throughout the album as well. That we sort of get like a good taste of that at this point in the track list. And Judge Judy is also another slight detour sonically and also lyrically as well. I think this is probably one of the more like sexual Tyler tracks in like a weird way. This one feels like a lot more sort of sensual, and Tyler essentially like expressing to this woman who I guess he's going to like pay to have sex with him that he's like into a lot of like weird fetish stuff. He's just looking to have a good time, I guess. I don't know. But then she seems like totally cool with it, and she's down to just let him like roam and just do like whatever he wants, essentially. The instrumental actually kind of reminds me of like Sweet I Thought You Wanted to Dance, and drawing in the parallels of those two I think is really funny, just because that song on Call Me If You Get Lost is like very, very different from the sort of concept that he's going for in Judge Judy. And so I think like the dichotomy between the two, but using like a similar sound, I think is very interesting. I wouldn't say it's my favorite on the track list, but I think for the concept of the album and what he's trying to say, I think, you know, you could say that it works here. I think the instrumental is nice. I just think it's not like my favorite of the track list personally. And then we get into Sticky, where we get into banger territory once again. We've got features from Glorilla, Sexy Red, and Lil Wayne. A crazy lineup, especially after Tyler said there was going to be no features, which was a fucking lie. We're back into banger territory. There's like these whistles, and you get like this chorus chant that feels like really rhythmic and aggressive at the very beginning. We've got the vocals from Glorilla and Sexy Red, I'm assuming, in the background. And then with like the outro too, like on like the big drum hits, it sounds like Tyler's got like a whole marching band in the studio with like all these horn hits and the drum line and everything like that. It's crazy by the end. The instrumental really just sort of goes insane on this track. And just some short and sweet verses from Glow, from Sexy Red, and from Lil Wayne. Obviously, you know, I would have liked to hear a little bit more from each of them, especially Wayne. I could always use more Wheezy, especially on a Tyler track. They've had great collabs in the past. But I like how it is here, and I like how short and sweet the track is. And it's just a nice little fun banger that's very tongue-in-cheek from the previous track, where he's depicting how he's going to essentially have sex with this woman and explore his fetishes, to this track essentially talking about getting sticky. It's just a fun speaker knocker, and honestly I think it's probably one of my favorites from the track list. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not sorry, but I'm sorry. And next we have Take Your Mask Off, which might be one of the more, I guess, controversial tracks. Maybe not controversial, but I guess like probably one of the more talked about and dissected tracks that's probably going to be off of this album. Obviously, you know, we have like some more Daniel Caesar backing vocals here, along with LaToya Williams. And I would say like the chorus is probably like one of the prettiest that Tyler's ever done. I really like it. It's very simple, but it's very nice, and it's very to the point of the track. Lyrically, Tyler is essentially depicting these specific individuals within the verse without saying any names, and allowing the listener to essentially dissect who these people might be. Maybe they're about people in Tyler's personal life. People are thinking that, you know, it could be like about Drake, about Kanye, about Kendrick. Like, who is he talking about? But I think that's sort of the point. I think Tyler wants you to sort of put a face from your own life of somebody that you know who is maybe, as Tyler says, like sort of hiding and is wearing a mask and is not showing their real selves to people, and is sort of hiding and sort of being a little bit of a hypocrite. It sort of drives this idea home too in the last verse, where Tyler literally is talking to himself and critiquing himself, saying that he himself is also wearing a mask, hearkening also to the album cover. The track just feels like very driven, and it's written with like a very specific purpose in mind. I'm sure people will probably be dissecting it to try and figure out maybe if he's referencing like Drake or Ye or Kendrick, or like, you know, whoever in the zeitgeist that people want to point the finger at. But I think it just works more as like this idea for the listener to try and figure out themselves, and you know, put faces to names. And sort of the way that he depicts a lot of these characters in this song, I think is really interesting, and does a great job of describing sort of the situations that these people could be living in. And of course, Daniel Caesar vocals are going to be more than welcome. They're sprinkled in throughout this whole album, and he sounds amazing. Tomorrow follows up the track with essentially his mother telling him that he wants grandkids. Like, she's been waiting a little while. He's starting to get into his 30s. He's getting old. And that's sort of just adding to like his paranoia and this idea of like this ticking clock that he was already dealing with before, and now his mom is sort of pushing this on him. It's a little bit of like a complicated track lyrically, and he's really starting to dissect this idea of age and, having kids and, bouncing that off of the story and the context that we know earlier from Hey Jane. It's really like a tough situation that he's putting himself in and that he's depicting at this point in the album. But he essentially tells his mom, like, I will get there at some point. Don't worry. Just, let me breathe. Let me have my moment and let me get there myself. But I promise it will happen at some point. Even if he is like lying to himself, I think it's nice that he is at least sort of addressing that at this point in the album, because it'll definitely change as we get further down the road. Thought I Was Dead is another speaker knocker with a bangin' Schoolboy Q feature, which was unexpected on this album, but is more than welcome. Again, like another Cherry Bomb reference, the last time they had worked together was back on Cherry Bomb. The track is another speaker knocker. Great beat. The horns and the marching band like instrumentals are back again, which is really nice. Tyler's doing like his ridiculous cadence and flow again, really putting on like a bunch of different vocal inflections on this album, which I really enjoy. Really fun to listen to, and it's like ridiculous and very braggadocious all over this song especially. He's essentially talking about how like people thought that he was dead because he took a break after the estate sale came out, and people thinking that he was going to step away from music to go focus on other things, and then he's like, no, I'm still here. I think at this point too, like, making this much of a statement, his album, I think Chromakopia, has been at like #1 for the past 2 weeks straight now. I don't know, like clearly he's got a point here. Next in the track list, we get Like Him, which is almost kind of acts as like the crux of this album, really. It immediately starts with another voice memo from his mother, essentially saying that like he has a lot of the features and reminds her of his father, which is like a really deep sort of nerve for Tyler because he never really knew his father. His mother, for most of his life, had essentially just hidden him away, said that he was a bad person, and Tyler just essentially took that and ran with it, and that became part of his identity. But as we learn throughout the track, that's not necessarily true. As Tyler is learning about this idea that, he's not like a bad person, and like, would things be different if he had known his father, if he was involved, if he was even in the picture? Would he be making music? Like, all these questions that Tyler is sort of throwing out to himself and also the audience. And it's just a very emotional track. I think it's one of the more beautiful tracks on this album, and I think it's also one of my favorites. I would say it's one of Tyler's one of the most personal tracks he's ever written, and I think it's fantastic, and I think it's really sort of holds as like the crux of this album, where you can trace everything that he's gone through and everything of who he is to this single point in his life where he didn't have his father in his life. The chorus of Mama, I'm Chasing a Ghost is just devastating, and the fact that it's sung the way that it is with these lovely piano chords throughout the whole track is just really nice. There's also a lot of passages where the instrumental essentially just cuts through almost as like this jazz backbeat and like these very weirdly placed synth effects that sound like almost eerie, and it almost seems like the track itself is contemplating these thoughts that Tyler is. The synths almost act as like this idea of like confusion and being caught in between, and I think it's a really great choice as well. And then we get to probably the most controversial track on this album, at least from what I've seen on the discourse, which is Balloon, with a great Doechii feature, by the way. I don't know why you guys are like so upset about this track. I mean, I think in the track list, this song definitely fits in like a weird place, especially right after Like Him. I think it works fairly well just as like the song itself. I don't really have like a problem with it. I think it's really fun, and I think the Doechii feature is hilarious. I know, like, I think at first the queef bar was like a bit much for me, but listening to it like for like the past 3 weeks or so, I think it's hilarious, and honestly it's really grown on me. I also think the instrumental is just so weird, and it's so like off kilter. It feels like a like a dysfunctional merry-go-round or something. Like, it's so odd. Obviously we get more Daniel Caesar vocals like in the background, which are fantastic. I don't know. I think overall it's like a decent track. Again, it's not my favorite off the track list, but like some people really think it's like awful and terrible. I think it's just the placement of this song specifically is just a little weird in the track list. There's definitely some like sequencing, I don't know if I would say issues, but like there's definitely some things with the sequencing of the songs that is a little weird. I think Tyler's trying to touch on a lot of different topics and trying to touch at different bases of ideas across like the entire track list, and it's like almost kind of an impossible task to try and sequence all of this with all of the different things that he wants to touch on. I think with the song itself, I think it works fine. I actually quite enjoy the Dochi feature. And also I think the core of the song is just Tyler like forcing himself to accept who he is, especially after the previous track where he just toiled with the idea of maybe like what if he had his father in his life, like what if he met him now, like what if he decided to meet him, to talk with him or something like that, you know. And then now we get to this where he's like, nah, like I don't need that to be the person who I am, and I can just continue forward knowing this now and be the person who I was meant to be, kind of thing, which I think is a nice sentiment. And I think especially coming off of, you know, sort of like the emotional gravity of like him into this song, I think is a nice little change of pace. And lastly, the album ends with I Hope You Find Your Way Home. I think this song is like a pretty decent closer. It almost acts in a similar way to me to the closing track on Flower Boy, Enjoy Right Now Today, I think it's called. I think it works in sort of in the same way of like a nice little bow to tie everything together. Tyler essentially has this whole verse where he's essentially like, nah, you know what? Like, you know, I'm going to swallow all this stuff that I just shared with you on this album, and I'm going to do me. I'm going to continue to do me, and I'm just going to push forward and be the person who I was meant to be, now knowing all of like the knowledge and all the experiences that I just discussed previously. And I think for the album, I think it's a good closer, and I think it's interesting to see how he decided to ingest all of this and how he plans on moving forward after this huge story that he just unfolded for us. And I think it's an interesting sort of, you know, little hint of what we could expect in the future, or maybe not. Like, honestly, at this point, Tyler could do like whatever. I'm still expecting a jazz album at some point, but we'll see. Overall, I think it's like a great closer, and I think it's a nice little conclusion to the story that he laid out for us on the album. And that's Chromakopia. I know this review took me like a while to make, and I'm sorry, but I just had so much on my plate the past few weeks. And finally got around to recording it, and I felt like every time I re-listened to the album, I just found more stuff to talk about and more little subtle details into the storyline that he was telling that I wanted to discuss, and I kept rewriting this over and over again. I'm kind of glad that I waited, but I'm sorry that it took so long at the same time. Here it is. Those are my thoughts. Overall, I really enjoyed this album, and I think it's probably one of the best of the year, I would say. And, you know, I think it's a great Tyler album. I would say, personally, I think it's like probably like my least favorite of the post Flower Boy era, but that doesn't mean that it's bad by any means. I mean, Tyler has been such a pivotal artist for me, and I don't think he could drop like a bad album per se. I've enjoyed everything that he's put out, and I really enjoyed this project. I would just say, you know, stacking up against Flower Boy, against Igor, and even against Call Me If You Get Lost, that's a tough task to try and one up any of those, but I think it's still a great project nonetheless, and I'm still going to be listening to it throughout the rest of the year for sure. And, you know, I think what's so cool is that, you know, I've been listening to him since I was like 16, and, you know, to see him like after all this time from Flower Boy on, and to see how he's progressed, and to hear him talk about the things that he's talked about on this album, I think is something that is super inspiring and interesting. And, you know, I think it's like really cool that you get to grow with an artist as you continue on. And I would say that, you know, he's one of the few artists that I was super into when I was a teenager that has carried forward and has actually progressed as an artist in his career. You know, I still can enjoy his music now, and I don't feel it's not going anywhere, or I feel bad for listening to it in any way, because, you know, I've grown with him and I understand a lot of the things that he's gone through, and I understand like his perspective. You know, I'm like 24 now, which is insane, and he's like in his 30s, and I can understand the idea of like growing older and looking back on his long career now. I think from that perspective, I think it's so cool, and I think it's so interesting to hear him talk about that on this album. I think overall, I'm going to give this album an 8 out of 10, and I think that's pretty solid. I had gone back and forth about the score for a bit, but I think that's pretty much where I'm going to land. It may grow on me even more in the future, and I might like it a little bit more, but you know, it's a Tyler record, so the longevity of these things really is pretty lasting. You know, I'm still listening to Flower Boy and Igor and even stuff from like Wolf and Goblin to this day. So the longevity of this thing, I think, will continue on, and you know, it's just another added album into his career that is going to be heralded as like one of his best. I think we'll see what happens at the Grammys as well. So, you know, that storyline could still being written of him, like, you know, staying single forever and being with like a ton of Grammys in his house. Who knows, but we'll see what happens. But yeah, I think overall I really enjoyed the project. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you guys enjoyed this review. I'm sorry this took so long, but you know, there was a lot going on, and I wanted to give you guys my full thoughts on the project. Go ahead and like and subscribe down below, and hit the notification bell, because I'm going to be posting more stuff as I'm going to be seeing a lot more movies in the next month or so before the end of the year. I'm probably going to be doing a couple more. You know, once it hits like the end of December, I'm going to be doing my top 10s of the year as well. So stay tuned for those. Obviously, I'm going to be coming out with more stuff in the coming weeks before all of that. So stay tuned for those. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And I appreciate you guys for watching. Thank you so much. And I will see you guys in the next video.